Well, I guess we're just after. Wow. Say you? Oh. We're just afternoon, so good afternoon, everybody. I know we're getting close to the lunch hour. I'm joined today by Jim Walker. I'm going to quickly, my name's Steve Woolidge. I work for Teradata Labs, based here in Silicon Valley. And we've got an R&D facility down the street in San Carlos, as well as in San Diego, California. Jim?
My name is Jim Walker. I'm Director of Product Marketing at Hortonworks. I've been with Hortonworks for about a year now. My first summit was last year. In fact, my first day of working at Hortonworks was at Summit last year, so it's really kind of cool to see this thing grow. I'm really proud to be up here with Steve, A, because they're a key partner for us at Teradata, but B, we're both Chicagoans, so I'm sorry if there's anybody in the audience from Boston, but home of the Stanley Cup champions. So anybody from Toronto, you love us too, right? So with that, there you go, Steve.
Thanks, Jim. So what we wanted to talk today is how enterprise architectures are really evolving. You heard a lot of that this morning with the keynotes, and so I'll talk about that at a pretty high level, give you Teradata's viewpoint on that. And for people that haven't worked with relational technology or have a data warehouse in their environment, I want to give some of the specifics on why these workload-specific platforms are important and what is it about a data warehouse, what's the role of that, what's the role of Hadoop and other technologies within this architecture. And we'll talk about how that comes together through a couple customer examples and use cases. I mean, there's a lot of press out there. I mean, this is just one interesting quote I saw in the Wall Street Journal. It's a bit dated now, but from August of last year. And people are very excited by the innovation that's happening around Hadoop. And what we see is that there's a lot of hype, and there's also a lot of hope. And the hope is that we're going to have some technology that is a silver bullet and makes data management really easy. And there's been a lot of innovations over the years. And part of what we look at within Teradata Labs is what are those innovations? How do we package them up and bring them to our customers in a way that they can implement them? Because not everybody has the skill sets oftentimes to implement some of these things. So there is a lot of issues with data. Metadata, as we talked about in the keynotes, is something that's been around. I think Merv Adrian was saying it's been an issue for IT for decades, and it doesn't go away, but we need to be able to integrate these systems together. So that's really what it's about. And when we would talk to our customers, this is some surveys that we've done. We asked, this is, I think, about 2,000 customers, what are the issues they're having as they try and implement big data? The number one thing, which isn't any surprise, is finding the skill sets. How do we get the people that can support and deploy these solutions? How do we integrate them together? How do we make them manageable? And how do we get end users access to this information so that they can find net new insights and deliver business value to their customers at the end of the day? Gartner talks about this shift from a single platform to an ecosystem. They call it the logical data warehouse. There's other research that says that, this one was Barry Devlin and Sean Rogers from EMA. The survey was basically that people have, on average, 3 to 5 different systems that they're using. It says nodes in here, but it's actually, those nodes refer to individual systems that they have working together symbiotically to help uncover insights from data and get that operationalized out in the business. So it really is a community, if you will, even within IT centers. And the way that Teradata defines that within our context is we call that a unified data architecture. And in our world, it's about having these workload-specific platforms that are engineered and designed for certain workloads in the ecosystem. And Hadoop is a huge component of that for data processing, refining, storage, and making sure that we're bringing that data and getting it out to the right system. And this doesn't have to be Teradata systems. You might have an Oracle or other systems within your architecture. And there's a lot of other things like streaming technology around this. But this is just a simplified view, if you will. But the idea is that these things have to work together, they have to be integrated well, and the end users all have to get access to the right data without worrying about the plumbing underneath of it. And that's what we spend a lot of time engineering within our solutions. So how many people have a data warehouse in their environment today? A good majority of the audience. How many people do not? I guess would be a question. So very few. So some of this may be I don't want to say obvious to you, but I'll just kind of refresh some of the things that are important about the data warehouse within that architecture. So number one is providing all the end users and applications access to integrated data across different departments, different operations, and giving them self-service. And the thing that you've seen if you've been in this industry for a while is as soon as you give an end user some information that they didn't have before, they'll have 5 or 6 or 7 more questions. They want to continue to do this ad hoc exploration of that data. So giving them that self-service environment on data that's cleansed, secure, trusted, who's accessing what data, particularly when you get into consumer information, is really important. And the challenge that IT groups face is they've got all these different applications that have data structured in different ways, and they've got to normalize that, get it into a single view of the customer that has a standard definition of what is the customer, what does end of the month mean, and different things about the supply chain, and just making sure that you have that consistent definition when you as a business go to analyze operations and set goals. So that's really what, at a high level, the data warehouse is about. And SQL is a huge part of that. The ecosystem around the data warehouse and the relational technology has evolved over decades now. So there's a lot of systems and applications that really rely on SQL to be able to go at that data through the security protocols and get what's relevant to them. And the thing with business intelligence tools is you've got machine-generated SQL that is often not as optimal as if you had a SQL developer writing that SQL, and the systems need to be able to interpret that. They need to be able to optimize it, in some cases rewrite it to get the best query plan. So a lot of that has been built in to the data warehouse technology and relational databases, and it's a very mature component. The other benefit of SQL is not only the querying, but the transaction guarantees or ACID compliance. And the orange frame here defines what ACID stands for, but it's really making sure that if you have inconsistencies anywhere in your data supply chain, where as you're loading data, if there's an issue loading it, or upstream, if you've got a process that's behaving irregularly, your downstream consumers and applications aren't going to get intermediate results of any kind. So as an administrator, if you will, you don't have to worry about those irregularities or inconsistencies in processing. Either the transaction happens or it doesn't, and until it gets committed, that information won't be available to the business unit. So it's not for every workload, but when you're talking about financial systems or customer data and transactions that are serving those customers, they want to make sure it's guaranteed correct results, it's 100% correct, et cetera. So that's part of it. The other thing with relational technology is that it's a deeply integrated stack. And what I mean by that is the system resources on the hardware are tightly integrated with the software, and that gives you a lot of optimization of those resources to make sure that you're using RAM, disk, and CPU very efficiently, and you're getting all the utilization out of those CPU cycles that you can. The other benefit of that granular integration that you have is you have very, very deep and rich workload management capabilities. So you can assign individuals or groups or types of queries different priorities. I know with Yarn and where Hadoop 2.0 is going, that's part of what's being achieved, and that's something that we fully believe in. That is the right way to help systems become mature, is that you have really, really good workload management capabilities and be able to support thousands of concurrent users, but also give space and resources to the ad hoc users that want to do data exploration. And then also have dynamic rules so that if, let's say your executive says, well, I want to get my dashboard refreshed, I'm going to hit this button, and if you want that executive to make sure they get the data, that job can have a higher priority. It can pause other resources in the system so that that query can go through. So that's one of the big benefits of workload management. The other big benefit of good vertical integration is performance, obviously. And mature data warehouses have this notion of temperature of the data, meaning that some data is accessed very, very frequently, and you'll want to have that be really, really fast, stored in system memory or RAM. Other data that's not accessed as frequently, you might have on rotational media, and you can have a hybrid mix of solid-state drives within those machines, as well as fast hard drives and even bigger, fatter, slower hard drives. So the point is, with big data, you're never going to be able to fit everything into memory cost effectively. So with a mature ecosystem like this within the data warehouse, you can have automation of those data partitions being moved to the right location. So for in memory, if there's something being accessed all the time, the system will automatically store that in memory. For things that aren't accessed as frequently, they can be kind of rolled off and put onto the rotational media. So this is a way that we really optimize the performance of the system so that you get the most value out of it and get the most utilization of the system. There's a lot of words on this slide. The point is that cost-based optimizers are also really important. I mentioned the need to be able to interpret SQL and come up with query plans. And it's not unlike someone who's really good at chess and can think 3, 4, 5 moves ahead. The grandmaster is sort of the analogy to the query optimizer. And in mature data warehouses, that is all automated and taken care of. And Hadoop in its state today, there's still a lot of hints and optimizations that the person who knows the system and where the files are stored has to think about which tables to read in first as part of the query that's being executed and such. So the last point is around security. And that's not to say Hadoop and other systems don't have security, but within data warehouses, we've engineered a lot of really, really fine-grained controls. So even in addition to row level and column level security, you can identify individual fields that have consumer information in it that is subject to privacy laws and flag that as a component that you would have access to or not. And you can define that by individuals and roles. And as an administrator, that's really important because you need to know who's accessing what data. You've got to be able to control that. And if people change jobs in the organization, you can just have that role change so that as people move into a different role, they can lose access privileges to certain types of information that's stored in a relational database. So auditing, control, encryption, all those things are really important, but it's that fine-grained security that's a very mature capability of the data warehouse. So that's just a flyby of the things that make a data warehouse really important within the ecosystem and the things that make it really stand out. But it doesn't stand alone. I think with Hadoop, discovery platforms, streaming technology, there's a lot of other workloads within the enterprise that are important. And Jim will talk to that in a minute. Just one last point, we're in the Bay Area, and we've got a richness of people that have really technical skill sets, and companies like LinkedIn, eBay, Facebook, Netflix, et cetera, that all have implemented and are using Hadoop extensively. They have a lot of data in that system, but all these companies also have data warehouses of some kind. So they see that sort of best fit for different types of applications as well. So I'll give some other use cases in a little more detail later, but just wanted to kind of mention that before I turn things over to Jim to talk about Hadoop and the value it brings within that ecosystem.
Cool, thanks, Steve. So my job is to talk where Hadoop fits in this overall infrastructure. I will echo a little bit of what Steve kind of ended with. Pretty much every single organization we're talking to today at Hortonworks and people who are headed down the Hadoop implementation kind of journey, a lot of it is starting within the world of people who understand the EDW. It's starting in the world of the analytics, right? People are looking to take some sort of data and use it in some analytic process. So, to be up here with Teradata, it's an honor for me because, quite honestly, our customers are looking for us to partner with the tools and the technologies that are important to them in their organizations. And now, ultimately, in the end, I don't really use the term big data anymore, I think. I think at the beginning of the year on our blog post, we posted what was our predictions for the year. And I said the term big goes away because, quite honestly, all of this is actually data in the end. I think ultimately what we do is we use the right tool for the right process, what we want to do. And I think that's what really the heart of what the relationship is between Hortonworks and Teradata when we go out and talk to customers. So my job here is to give you a little bit about kind of where Hadoop fits into this overall architecture. So when I start to look at this, we had this audacious goal on the back of our business cards at Hortonworks. It says by the year 2015, half the world's data will be processed by Apache Hadoop. It doesn't say HDP. I would love for it to be Hortonworks Data Platform, of course, but quite honestly, we're about really making sure the ecosystem is enabled to use Hadoop because we know that in order for Hadoop to go broad, right, and to be used everywhere, that the tools and the technologies that we use in our organizations today have to adopt it. It ultimately becomes a +1, right? And so if we're going to go there, if you think about the accelerating rates of data in the world, and we think about that statement, that's a really crazy statement to make. but we think it's possible, right? And in order to do this, there's really kind of two keys that actually allow Hadoop to work with some of the tools that are in your organizations today. And I'm going to focus on these two because I think it's the two key integration points between ourselves and Hadoop, I should say, and the enterprise data warehouse. And it really comes down to, you know, what is that repository, I guess, where you can land the kind of net new data sources, and then what is that integration point between the two systems? And so Steve touched on it just now, Merv touched on it in the keynote. You know, the key that makes the whole world go round, ultimately, is metadata. Everything is structured. The term unstructured is one of those things that kind of grates on me a little bit, but I'll come back to that. I think everybody has a slide about the rate of data exploding in our organizations, right? And so I use this just to say, hey, Steve, we've got a slide that talks about the data growth too. But it means a lot because organizations are looking at, you know, 85% new data, right? That's where a lot of the growth is happening in organizations, right? How do they take advantage of that? You know, how do we take advantage of data that we once left on the data center floor? You know, my friend John Kreisa introduced me to a term last year. It was called exhaust data. I love the term because for years and years and years, we've been throwing data away. You know, what's that salient detail that we could pull out of there that has some sort of business value? And I think that's the kind of things that people are looking at and saying, hey, how can I use this in the context of a larger analytic process and use this in the context of my EDW, right? And I think these are the data types that people are really starting to look at and start to use. And so, I mean, I use this slide really to focus on that 85%, that key growth area, right? So when I think about the key pieces, of course, and this is our motherhood and apple pie kind of, you know, what is Hadoop? When I go out and talk to people and try to educate them on, you know, the baseline of Hadoop, it's storage and processing. Everybody has seen the video of what, you know, what a Hadoop is, right? Distributed storage, highly reliable distributed processing, right? But there's some key characteristics of Hadoop. I mean, I love the 3 V's, volume, velocity, variety, but ultimately it makes a whole lot of sense, right? Because if you think about the flexibility of Hadoop and what we can do with data today, or what we weren't able to do before, it's just tremendous, right? If you think of some of the economic factors, when you start to scale out to petabytes of data, you know, there's just certain sets of data that just really make sense within Hadoop. Now, how do I use those in the context of my overall EDW? I need to come back to metadata. And so, you know, so in the late 90s, I was a developer. And, you know, we were building this massive customer care billing system for a telecom provider. And it was my first job out of school, out of university. And I was lucky enough to start at the very beginning of the project. And I remember we spent the first, oh God, it had to be 6 to 7 weeks just figuring out what the data model was going to be for that project, right? And we were talking about 2 years of development, right? And we set forth with the data model because half the project was being done in COBOL, right? And I forget what the backend database. I was coding in Smalltalk, so we kind of had a little bit of leeway on our side, right? But regardless, I spent all this time, or we spent a whole lot of time figuring out what a data model is because we had to figure out what the schema was going to be, right? The beauty of Hadoop, and one of the reasons that I just am appalled by the word unstructured sometimes, or why it grates on me, is because the beauty of Hadoop is I need schema on read. I don't need schema on write, right? So I could just write files into HDFS and then use tools like hcatalog to extract it how I want to see that data. I've also been in the master data management space. And one of the key areas or key concerns in MDM was always saying, hey, I want to see a customer. And there was this single source of the truth, and that was the truth, and that was it. I remember an analyst once said, no, it's a single source of the facts. What that truth is really means what it means to that person, right? So how do I look at data under the context or a different lens on who's asking for that data? And really, hcatalog is a key piece of that, right? How do I say I want to see a customer in the context of legal, or the customer in the context of, say, customer service, or whatever that data type is? hcatalog allows you to look at all the same data in a completely different way, depending on who's asking for it. Now, that's schema on read, right? And that's really, really important so that when we integrate with things like the data warehouse, if they have schema, we can now be looking at data in different ways all the way down into HDFS. And I'll let Steve talk more about integration of stuff that we've done with Teradata around SQL H. Right, so I think metadata is really the juice that makes the whole world go round. Right, that is that interface between all things. And you know, hcatalog and what the guys are doing in that project is really kind of amazing. It's really cool stuff going on there. The other thing that's different about open source, and it's funny, I give this presentation to often it's like BI people and stuff, and they don't understand the open source world. I think one of the key points and one of the reasons why distributions are out there is really because we bring this innovation out to the enterprise. The rate of innovation in the Apache community right now around Apache Hadoop is almost mind-numbing, stunning. The amount of, take for instance Hive. Hive 11 was released, I think, 3 weeks ago. I think there were 386 JIRA tickets addressed in that thing over the course of, I think it was 3 or 4 months. 55 different companies contributed, right? That's an amazing group of people, right? And that's a lot of innovation, right? You're bringing together some leaders, right? So bringing that value to the enterprise data warehouse is absolutely hugely important. I think it's another key value of why Hadoop fits in this whole world. I stood in front of a room full of SQL DBAs about 4 or 5 months ago, and I was kind of afraid to stand up there, but they all got it once I showed them this slide. And I think the real key here, and if I start to think about the difference between our old world RDBMS and the world of Hadoop, it really comes down to schema. It's really the fourth line up there. You know, that story around not having a very rigid or very strict data model and being able to ask through, looking at data in many different views is absolutely critical to them. I think also when we think about, you know, the old world of RDBMS, reads are very fast. And I think in Hadoop, writes are very fast, right? I mean, there's a whole bunch of reasons why, you know, Hadoop is very different, but it's a sliding scale. And I think of, you know, all these different reasons why Hadoop is different from the RDBMS. So where does it fit? You know, so when we work with our customers, of course, a lot of the analytics people come in. We really feel it is a +1 in the overall data architecture. We find people looking at net new data sources, bringing them into Hadoop, refining them, and then feeding these results, salient results, into, say, an EDW to use in an analytic process, right? And so we work very closely with Teradata. Now, I love my slide because it looks like this, but it's very close to this. Right? I think it's just really a different pivot point. And quite honestly, there's not an organization in the world who's not really looking at it in this way. You know, Hadoop doesn't obviate. It doesn't go up the stack and say, you need to get rid of anything. It augments it, right? And so that's what we're seeing in our customers, and that's exactly what we're seeing in the world of the enterprise data warehouse, right? And with anybody who's going in that stack. Now, you know, we also feel that at Hortonworks, for certain, you know, Hadoop is a platform, right? Hadoop is a platform for storage and processing. Yeah, there's a lot of things that go into Hadoop that allow it to function. And you know, some of the advances around Yarn, allowing it to kind of interact with different systems in many different ways, allowing processing models to be pushed down into Hadoop, they're really important. But ultimately, in the end, I think Hadoop has its role, and it's a platform. It is a piece of the overall coin, right? And it's a piece of the overall data architecture strategy. And I think, you know, some of the things that you see from Teradata are dead on. It mirrors exactly what we're seeing in our customers. Now, we're really happy about that because, you know, 18 years of experience from Teradata is absolutely huge, right? They kind of know this world. So I'll go back to my first slide, which said, you know, what are those two key points, right? That what does Hadoop mean in this overall infrastructure? But I think ultimately it comes down to familiarity. When I first started looking at Hadoop, it was about 2 or 3 years ago. I went to one of my friends who works at a large financial services institution. I said, hey, this Hadoop thing's really cool. You know, you should really use this. This is awesome. He's like, hey, Jim, that's really great, but I tell you what, I can't use it unless it works with the tools I already have, right? And that's where, you know, the power of partnering with organizations like Teradata is absolutely huge for us, right? There is a world of how many years of experience building out Teradata and Astrodata? 30 years? So you think about that many engineers building these tools, right? Hadoop needs to be a platform that feeds into that, right? Because our users, the licenses, the tools, everything they have, you aren't going to retrain vast amounts of an organization. You need to work with them. And that's called familiarity. And it really addresses all of those key areas that Steve had addressed on his very first slide, right? So that's where I kind of feel it all fits. And then Steve is here to kind of pull it all together.
Cool. Thanks, Jim. So, you know, again, this is our view of how the architectures are evolving. I wanted to walk through a couple examples of how this comes together. So this is I don't want to say canonical example, but this is a common pattern that I've seen with a number of customers where it's about providing better customer service, right? They've already got information about their customers today from, you know, point of sale or in-store and different things that they're doing, but they want to figure out things like web clickstream, social media, IVR call records from the call center. How can we take these new data types that are quote unquote unstructured, which Jim hates that word, and I agree, because it does have a structure, but it's not schema aware, it isn't analyzable in a lot of those formats. So Hadoop provides an awesome platform to ingest those files in their native format, to store them forever, if you will, and do some refining and bring out the stuff that's analyzable, and then move it in some cases to the discovery platform or the data warehouse. You know, some exploration will be done in Hadoop, given what's happening there as well, but there are workload-specific platforms that allow you to do more advanced types of analytics with out-of-the-box visualization capabilities, you know, BI tools and other things that we're developing. So it's about having this data flow, and it's different for every customer in terms of where the data goes, and that's part of the guidance we try to give to our customers, is to help them walk through their architecture and figure out where does Hadoop fit, where does it add the most value, what new data types can they bring in, what workloads belong on that system, and how does it all fit together. And ultimately then, if you have that information about the customer, it helps you retain them, give them better relevant offers online and those types of things. So that's the high-level generic use case. And how we deliver this to our customers is engineered workload-specific platforms. You know, this is the product family, if you will, from Teradata. So I don't want this to be a commercial, but one new thing we announced today is the Appliance for Hadoop, which you saw on the main stage with Scott now. So it is a workload-specific platform with hardware that's focused on data staging and refining to then feed other systems within the ecosystem. And we've got data warehouse technology, but we also have, for people that want a smaller deployment for a data mart or just getting started, different form factors and price points for these things. Okay? So from an engineering perspective, the thing we do to incorporate Hortonworks and Hadoop in general into our ecosystem is a lot of software value-added engineering. So every company has connectors to move data. So that's nothing new, but one of the early projects our companies worked together on was HCatalog, which is something that Hortonworks was very involved with driving as it became part of Hive now. And SQLH was a capability that we announced last Hadoop Summit on Aster. It's also available now on the integrated data warehouse. And essentially it gives a lot of the benefits I talked about for the data warehouse, ANSI compliance, the optimizer, SQL completeness, et cetera, to the end users that are already using Teradata. So now they can grab data on the fly as needed that's stored in Hadoop. Maybe they don't want to store more than 2 years worth of data for a certain domain in the data warehouse, but they want to have a longer history actively able to grab that in different data types, et cetera. And it allows us to reference where the data is stored in HCatalog and then go ahead and grab the data directly without having to go through a MapReduce translation of that SQL statement. So it improves performance, allows you to kind of play the data where it lies, to use a golf analogy, and have a broader amount of data without having to replicate it within multiple systems. And then in terms of how we add value on top of that, with Aster, that's our dedicated discovery platform. We spend a lot of time developing analytic functions that bring together different analytic techniques onto one platform. So SQL, MapReduce processing, statistics, graph, and provide more turnkey, if you will, functions that people can use out of the box as well as through a BI tool. And some of the new things we've done there is visualization. So now you can visualize data, grabbing it from Hadoop, from the data warehouse or other systems, and have a real robust discovery platform that people can find new insights. And this is an example of some of the customers that are using that Aster discovery platform. And this particular appliance is also able to configure Hadoop nodes within it. And all the customers up here, with the exception of Comcast, also have Hadoop nodes in this appliance. So they're using that balanced idea of having certain nodes for the data staging and refining, certain nodes that are dedicated to the analytics. And oh, by the way, all these customers have a data warehouse as well. So they see that value of new types of analytics and new data, or dark data, as Merv Adrian talks about it. And how do we figure out the value within that and then bring it into the rest of the enterprise? So that's one way to look at it. So an example of that is one of our retail customers who wanted to do better consumer understanding of people coming to the website. So they sell a lot in stores as well as online, and essentially they had a lot of interactive marketing people that wanted to have self-service access to web clickstream data. I mean, you can get a lot of that from packaged, web analytics tools, but they often don't get into the granular level of detail, and it doesn't give you that ability to really look at individual behavior across the website. And the analogy they used when they spoke at our users conference was they look at these paths that people take across the web pages as almost DNA sequences that are unique to segments or individuals. And by being able to load the data more quickly into Hortonworks, then sessionize that information and define patterns, the business analyst can define those microsegments not only based on what they have with their statistics package, but also looking at the causality and what people are actually doing when they come to the site. Which products are they looking at? How do they go from one page to another? And is there a correlation between people that look at shirts and this type of shoe and then go buy this other product? So,
hey, Steve, and I think the
yes,
clickstream and sessionization stuff is huge. I think there's established best practices on how to do that in Hadoop that, I mean, Google it and you'll find out exactly how to do that. So it's fairly simple and straightforward to do it. I think that's one of the key points here as well. It's, you have a lot of people just in the general public who knows what's going on to actually feed. So you talk about reading very fast, but you also talk about a fairly kind of quick time to delivery in terms of doing some of the things like sessionization for clickstream analysis, that sort of thing. So, and then you have all the Astro tools on top of it to do kind of I like to call it a shortcut to data science sometimes, but
yeah, data science in a box. Good stuff. And this is an example of one of those visualization components that I was talking about in the Discovery platform. So this is looking at online checkout flow analysis. So ideally, you've got people that are coming into the funnel, if you will, and that bar across the top is solid because people stay in, they look at stuff, they add it to the cart, and they check out and buy it all. But the reality is people drop out, they either lose interest or go somewhere else. So this gives the analyst a visual view of how many people are going and looking at this other page. Maybe they're going to try and find more information about that product before they buy it. So this allows them to start to look at, maybe there's not enough relevant content about that product that they're going to buy on that page, and that's why they're dropping out. So this is just a way to explore the website in more detail. This is another visualization. This is a collaborative filtering algorithm that we've developed and wrapped some visualization around. So the idea is that you can look for products that people buy together, right? And this is just a visual way of looking at that affinity. And you can drill into this. This is just a screenshot, but it's a 3D interactive thing. This I can zoom in. You can see the detailed data of people that buy things together. You can get some coloration on that, et cetera. So it's just a quick flyby. If you're interested, there's more at our booth that we can talk through on some of this stuff. But I just want to give you a sense of the additional value that we add on top for customers. And again, by having Hadoop being able to grab all this data now, we can unlock these visual insights on top of more and more data and give people tools to be able to explore it more freeform and leverage MapReduce processing and other things underneath it. So as I mentioned, we've got the new appliance. I'm not going to go through the details here. The other thing that's new that you might not have heard about is Teradata also has a new resell agreement with Hortonworks. So part of this partnership that we've extended and announced is the ability for people that want to build their own clusters and have that DevOps skill set, they can go out and buy a reference Dell server that we recommend, and Hortonworks helped us identify the right performance characteristics of that hardware, and Teradata will fully support it. So we take the first line support. We've got Hortonworks as part of the contract to do second and on down support so that our customers can have that single trusted source that they go to for their data warehouse, as well as Hadoop single vendor, but it's leveraging Hortonworks and all the innovation that's happening in the community as well.
Yeah, Steve, one thing, I mean, if we think about the tools the analyst uses, right? So the visualizations, all this stuff that Steve showed is awesome, and that's exactly what organizations want. I think often in a Hadoop project, the redheaded stepchild is the ops guy, right? So the ops guy gets left holding the bag because I've got this cluster of 200 nodes and I got to keep this thing up and running. Oh my God, what am I going to do to that, right? And so, there's tools to do that in Hadoop. Each of the vendors has a tool that does that for them. I think one of the key points of integration that we're doing with Teradata is integrating with Teradata Viewpoint. So you have a single pane of glass across, both your Teradata installation, Teradata, Hadoop appliance, and then if you had Hadoop running on commodity hardware as well, all in single pane of glass, right? And so that's really, I think, a key person in the Hadoop adoption process is that Hops guy, and you can't forget about him. It's another point of integration between your current tools and then what you're doing in Hadoop, which is important.
Absolutely. And for that ops guy, we want to add a lot of other value and software into the appliances as well. So, Scott talked about some of the partnerships. The other thing that Teradata is really good at is we have automated system monitoring and management. So in addition to Viewpoint, which is now integrated across Hadoop and the rest of our systems, we've got this thing called Teradata Vital Infrastructure, which actually phones home to customer support. So if there's a NIC card that's failing or an issue with a RAID controller or anything else, that'll automatically, and there's something like 100 different alerts we've built specifically for Hadoop and Hive processes and everything else. So that customer support rep might see an issue before the end customer even knows about it.
If a job is held up, if a data node has failed, all the different alerts that you would see in your Hadoop cluster are all going to feed through.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so almost done, and we'll open it up for questions. I'm not going to talk in a lot of detail about this, but we have a lot of services as well. So one thing we've done at Teradata is we've staffed up, we've hired people with Hadoop experience so we can come in, help implement, do knowledge transfer, and really help optimize and figure out what are the right workloads, how does Hadoop coexist with the rest of the architecture in the data warehouse. And this is just I don't want to say it's a high-level example, but this is an example of the type of things that we would come in with a services engagement and create a scorecard of what's the data that you're trying to get at, what type of analytics you're trying to do on it, and what's the right system to attack that problem. So depending on the application and the use case, and these slides will be made available, and it's in a joint white paper that we've written with Hortonworks, we can begin to have a conversation with a customer of, okay, if you're dealing with web clickstream and you want 30 days worth of data, you're going to join with other stuff, Aster might be the right place to put it initially. If it's a longer amount of data, or if you're starting with call records from the call center, you're going to want to land it in for Hadoop first, do some processing there before you move it downstream. So in a lot of ways, this thing moves from bottom left to upper right in terms of bringing data into the architecture, refining it down to something that's then operationalized and push out to those thousands of users and applications through the warehouse. So this is
and
the
Steve,
type
I mean,
of
I
thing
think,
we want to...
Yeah, I mean, with the customers that we talk to, when they ask us about the EDW and Hadoop, this is a critical slide or a critical piece of information we share with them, because most people are looking at their Hadoop implementation from the viewpoint of their data. And if you start to look at the overlays that Steve had on there, it says the different types of data and what you're using where, really helps them kind of identify what pieces and where all the pieces are actually going to fit together. So I think from a complete puzzle in terms of data, the slide does a fairly good job of doing that. We use it all the time, so.
Okay, so I just got the 2-minute warning. I was told no questions, but can I have one question? We're at the end here, and you can come get a free t-shirt at our booth. So if there's any questions at the mics, we can take one before we wrap up, and otherwise be happy to hang out and go into more detail on anything. Yeah, the fundamental difference between Aster and Hadoop is we implemented MapReduce on a relational database within Aster instead of a file system. And we've been adding a lot of other analytic functions and prepackaged capabilities on top of that, leveraging that SQL and MapReduce layer that's there. But there's a lot more we can talk about. But that's a fundamental difference. Okay. Well, thanks for coming, and if there's any questions, we'll be hanging around for a few minutes. Thank you.